Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lisa Seco, and we are really happy to be joined by Clara Pregitzer with the Natural Area Conservancy based in New York City. Today we're going to be talking about forest and cities, our favorite topic with Green Seattle Partnership, but really bringing in a national perspective on the work that we do here in Seattle as part of Seattle Forest Week. Before we get started, I want to make sure that we're all good with our Zoom basics. I know that we've been doing this for a long time now, but just so everybody's aware, everybody's muted right now and their videos are off. The presentation is being recorded, so you can share it with your friends later. If you would like to see closed captioning, you can use the toolbar at the bottom of your screen to get that information. And then for questions, it would be great if you could use the Q&A section for questions. But please feel free to use the chat if you're having any issues that the host can help with. So, for example, like audio problems. All attendees are muted. The bar at the bottom, I wanted to call out in particular. So if you have questions, please use that Q&A box. If you have issues with audio or anything, feel free to chat us on the side and we'll help you out as much as possible. This presentation is part of Seattle Forest Week. For those who are here in the Seattle area, we have spent the last week celebrating everything urban forest. We kicked it off last week with creek tours and Seattle Arbor Day, and continued the week with different presentations and tours across the city. This is our last event before we end the week with Green Seattle Day on Saturday. So tomorrow, for folks who are in the area and interested, we still have space to come join us in planting at 17 sites around the city. So before we get started with Claire's presentation, I wanted to take a second and acknowledge that this work that we do with the Green Seattle Partnership is on the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people, the lands that touch the shared water of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Puyallup, Suquamish, Tulalip, and the Muckleshoot nations. This acknowledgement does not take place of authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, but really we bring it here in this presentation today to make sure that we're really resisting the erasure of Indigenous past, present, and future in our work in Seattle's forested parklands. Before we get started, I wanted to take a second to introduce Clara. Clara has been a friend and colleague now for several years, even though they are based on the other side of the country. Clara led the forest assessment component of the Natural Area Conservancy's ecological assessment for New York City parkland in the development of their forest management framework, which you'll learn more about today. She also previously worked with New York City Parks and Natural Resource Group, conducting ecological assessments in over 1,500 acres of New York City parks. She holds a BS in forestry from Northern Arizona University and MS in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Tennessee, and has her PhD from the Yale School of Environment. She is currently working on understanding conservation goals and management strategies for urban forested natural areas across the United States. So welcome, Clara. I'll stop sharing and you can jump in. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that introduction. My name is Clara Pregitzer, and I'm with the Natural Areas Conservancy, and really thrilled to be here. So today, I wanted to spend some time just giving an introduction to myself and the Forests and Cities Network, which Lisa, Michael, and Weston are all a part of, and kind of why they asked me to give a presentation to in this setting today. And then I thought I'd share some trends on urban natural areas care across the whole US, and really thinking about trends and trajectories. And this is really drawing from some work we did on a national survey and in collaboration with many of our partners in the Forests and Cities Network. So I'll describe how those two are connected. And then I'll share some resources, and specifically, we just released this Urban Silviculture guide, which was sort of the catalyst for kind of joining and presenting to you all today. I was in Seattle early October, and I'll be in Seattle again with my team for our Forest and Cities workshop, and also for the Partners in Urban and Community Forestry program, and brought some copies of our new silviculture guide to Lisa, Weston, and Michael, and thought it'd be an interesting topic to discuss today. So I'm hoping that we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion as well. So I thought I would just start by introducing the organization I work for. So I work for a nonprofit that's based in New York City called the Natural Areas Conservancy. We're a pretty young organization. We're just 10 years old, and we work in a private-public partnership with the Department of Parks and Recreation, which is really the main landowner of natural areas in New York City. Our organization really exclusively focuses on urban natural areas care. So we focus on forests, wetlands, and grasslands. My experience is, and work is typically more focused on forests, but we have many tidal marshes and wetlands that need care and stewardship in New York City, and provide a lot of benefits. And I won't be talking about those today, but that is in our purview as well. And I, in my role at the Natural Areas Conservancy, I manage our research and conservation team, and we do data collection that can really inform advocacy efforts, management, and science-based planning. But we also have a trails team and an internship team, and we do community forestry and work a lot with the community. And so I've learned a lot from my colleagues in Seattle, and excited to kind of share some similarities and some differences in our work today. So I thought I would just, I thought it'd be fun to show this picture because I met Lisa in 2015 when I was spending some time in Seattle, and it was right after we led a big forest assessment in New York City. And so the picture on the left is a field crew that's doing some forest measurements in a big vineland in Staten Island. And we were doing this to inform our forest management plan. And at the time, we didn't really know how we were going to use the data. We knew we wanted to use it for prioritizing work, setting some more holistic goals for forest care, but we weren't really sure how to do that in the city context. And so when I was visiting Seattle in 2015, I kind of did a cold call to Lisa and Michael, and they were super generous. And I'm there with one of my colleagues from the New York City Urban Field Station, Rich Hallett, who works for the Forest Service. And they took us on a tour, and it was just so inspirational to kind of learn about how the Green Seattle Partnership Plan really informed work and this prioritization and planning. And it really led to a lot of the way we framed our forest management plan in New York City. And so this was the only picture I could find on my computer of that field visit. I'm sure I have others, but just kind of wanted to say that's when our our professional relationship kind of started, and we really learned a lot from the framing around the Green Seattle management plan. So yeah, this is a kind of the front image of our forest management framework in New York City. This was released in 2018. And I think one of the things that we really took from the Seattle framework was kind of looking at a prioritization framework around health and threat. And so we came up with some different equations and approaches to that, but that sort of framing and long-term vision was kind of critically embedded into our forest management plan in New York City. And I'll say the plan that we found in Seattle, we spent probably 6 months looking for other city plans, and they were really buried on websites, and it was really hard to find. And in reviewing all of them, we kind of decided that we really liked the Seattle plan. And so just kind of wanted to share that and yeah, this is the plan. I think May can put a link to it in the website if in case anyone is interested. I won't read these, but this is kind of how we framed the plan is having kind of 3 high-level goals: that forests are healthy, that people benefit from forests, and that they're supported financially. So we laid out different strategies for that. And what I found was really unique in the way that we structured our plan is that we really paired ecological condition data that we collected during our field-based assessment with a financial model and came up with a goal to have $385 million of new money invested in forest care over 25 years. That might seem like a lot of money, but it really, the New York City budget is basically a rounding error. And I'll talk about this a little bit more. I think I have some information here on this slide. The funding for forest care is really pennies in New York City. So our city parks budget, which is where most of the money comes from for supporting forest care, is less than 1% of the total city budget goes to the Parks Department, and then less than 1% of the city parks budget goes to forest care, even though it's a third of the park system. And so just to kind of, it took us some time to uncover some of these inequities in funding and care across the city. And I think there are even more inequities when you look at how conservancies, which are great and provide a lot of additional care and support to our park system in New York, but are typically focused in wealthy and affluent neighborhoods where there's people that want to donate private dollars to support forest care. And so Central Park Conservancy and Prospect Park Alliance are kind of 2 really well-known private-public partnerships, and they're incredible organizations with a lot of friends and colleagues that work there, but has sort of kind of doubled down on investment in a few parks, leaving some of our parks in our outer boroughs that have had almost no money invested in them in a really long time. So a lot of the work that I've done as a forest ecologist and working in conservation has gone to support advocacy and funding calls to increase the budget for forest care. So there's a few other things I just wanted to highlight. The plan was released in 2018. We also included a social assessment on who's using the park and kind of what it means to them. And that was, we did that in collaboration with the Forest Service, and there are some reports out about that that are on our website. And it took us about 3 years to get the plan complete. And then it resulted in 2019, we received an additional $4 million for forest care, which felt like this huge win. But it was only secured for 1 year. And then in 2020, due to the pandemic, the city completely slashed funding to natural areas care. And then now it's back, but at a lower amount at 2.5 million. And so there's been a lot of kind of drama around the city budget and if forest care will or will not be funded. And we still have not received kind of long-term funding, which is what we really need on either a 5 or a 10-year or even longer basis to kind of secure the money that is needed for long-term forest care. All right, so that's a little bit of an introduction to the Natural Areas Conservancy and me and our work in New York City. But now I kind of wanted to shift focus to describe some trends in natural areas care in a more nationally. So kind of because of some of the conversations we had really early on around developing our forest management framework, I became really interested in who across the country was managing natural areas. At least in New York, it felt sort of like this subset of a subset of a subset of kind of park care. We didn't fully belong, to parks. We didn't fully belong to the urban forestry world because the urban forestry world felt really focused on street trees. So it felt sort of like this niche type of work. And so I became interested in uncovering kind of, is this really common? What are other people doing? in natural areas care across the country. And so we developed a survey and sent out sort of this cold call survey with a lot of questions about organizational size, structure, how long you've been managing natural areas, your goals, your challenges. And this is a map that displays everyone we heard from. I thought we might hear back from 20 people. I would have been happy if that was the response. But in fact, we heard back from over 120 organizations. The color codes aren't really important here, but they do represent different types of organizations. Mostly we heard from municipalities and nonprofits, but a few other types of groups. And it was just really interesting and exciting to hear from so many people across the country that were doing similar work and shared similar goals. So there's a report on this on our website, and I have a few things to share, a few kind of highlights here, but overall we found out that forests and cities are a really big resource. Along with this, I did an analysis using Trust for Public Lands data in the 100 largest cities in the US, and we found that in fact, natural areas account for the majority of parkland in cities, 68%, and that's over 1 million acres, which was huge. I had no idea that that was the most common type of parkland. But there's some threats. So natural area parkland was decreasing. So we were able to look at the same survey over a 5-year period and found that roughly 40,000 acres were lost, either converted to another type of land use, or we don't really know why. They could have been converted to development. Many cities don't have protections around natural areas in cities. And so that was really interesting to sort of see that this is a super common type of parkland, but in fact, it's decreasing at a pretty rapid rate, 4% in a 5-year period. There's a lot of questions that we asked people in the survey or respondents. And so I have 2 questions here, and just to kind of give you a flavor of what some of the trends are. So we asked folks what the primary factor that they consider when making management decisions, and across the board, conservation of native species, plant biodiversity, and public safety were the top 3. But there were a lot of other factors that weren't considered. It wasn't surprising, but it still, I think, was really kind of shows an opportunity to think about urban heat island, climate change, proximity to low-income neighborhoods, were public access were not top of the list, and just kind of shows the opportunity in kind of thinking about a lot of different social and biophysical factors that make our parks healthy and our natural areas accessible to people. We also asked, what challenges does your organization face in meeting its goals? For the people on this call, I bet this is no surprise. So weed species, limited staff, low awareness were kind of top of the list. That was really surprising to me, the low awareness, just because I think when we asked about that in a little bit of a deeper level, I think there was some sentiments that it was even low awareness kind of within agencies, so that maybe even the city government might not have strong awareness or understanding of natural areas. And so their uncertainty in management approach was considered to be the least important, but still over half respondents said it was important or a very important challenge that they faced. But limited staff and funding was, kind of an operational challenge. And then thinking through some of these other more like biophysical or kind of urban stressors, such as weed species or disrupted natural processes due to the urban environment, were also challenges. So in summary, a lot of common challenges that respondents were facing. So this really led us to want to dig in a little bit deeper. And so in 2019, we invited a subset of the cities that participated in the survey to attend a workshop in New York City in person. And we had 12 cities come, and it was really to discuss some of these opportunities and challenges and create case studies and really kind of strengthen a community of practice. And that's when our Forests and Cities Network really started. We've since included 5 more cities. So there's 17 cities here on the map, and these are all part of our Forests and Cities Network. The Forests and Cities Network is includes multiple people from a single city. So we asked people to kind of apply as a team so that either a relationship or the dialogue could both happen within colleagues in the same city, but also across city teams. So the goals of our network are really to strengthen a community of practice around natural areas care. And so to really kind of show up to conferences, events, have a lot more broader awareness about the need for conservation and care of natural spaces in cities, and to really kind of share lessons learned with others. And we found that people were really craving that. It was so fun to be in person and kind of learn from one another. So that's a big goal of our network, increasing knowledge and kind of advancing urban forest science and practice. And so until 2014 in New York City, we didn't even have maps of where natural areas existed in a really robust way. We didn't have a lot of baseline data that described the condition or the trajectory. And so just having more information about the condition, the trajectory, that can inform management, but also give us an understanding of what's happening in both sort of the climatic setting and the urban setting to our forests. And then finally, to increase and address some of those challenges, and one of those is funding. So to really come together and increase funding and support for natural areas, I think that was a really big need, and kind of goes hand in hand with raising awareness. Here are just a few images of natural areas in other cities. This is in New York City and Inwood Hill Park, which is in the northern tip of Manhattan. This is in Indianapolis, which is one of our Forests and Cities team. Oops, and then this is in Florida. So one of the things that we realized and discussed a lot in our workshop was just the range of conditions of urban forests. And this, of course, is like any forest. Just because it's in a city doesn't mean it's any different. There's a range of conditions, and as land managers, we really think about kind of what conditions do we want and how do we get there. And we talked a lot about kind of what this range of conditions mean, and kind of getting to different states. We're never going to get to just like one climatic state in the forest, but really kind of we want healthy forests that provide social benefits for people, that are welcoming, provide public access, and also support plants, animals, and ecosystem services. And so that was a common challenge, something that many people described. And so I wanted to describe just an effort that our network participated in together this past summer. One of the things that we discussed at our 2021 virtual webinar, we had a virtual workshop in 2021. And I think Michael Yadrick, who I don't know if is on the line, even mentioned this earlier to me when we were talking about mapping, different ecosystem services of natural areas, and like really caring about cooling benefits of forests, and how could we get some data about natural areas in kind of to let ourselves be part of this conversation about cooling. And so what we did, there's a picture of Lisa putting up one of the sensors in Seattle, is we developed a study design that looked at both surface temperature and air temperature in healthy forests and degraded forests, and then compared that to a shaded tree in a streetscape or in a designed setting. and really to kind of look at and get at what are the coolest places in the city. And this might be really obvious that, of course, forests, you know, in natural areas would be really cool and provide a lot of benefits. And you can see that's the surface temperature map of New York City. And you can basically just see where the blue is, it's cooler, and that's where all of our parks are. But that had never really been quantified directly. So it felt like a great opportunity to try to gather a little bit of information about this. And so we purchased a bunch of sensors and then sent them out to all 12 city teams, and members of Forest and Cities Network put them up in a similar study design, and then they just came down last October, so or just a few weeks ago, earlier this month. So I don't have data from Seattle, but I have some preliminary data that I can share from New York City that we've already been able to analyze. And so this is a figure that shows different types of land cover. So you can see a lot of the paved surfaces, buildings, paved surfaces, roads, railroads, and then this just shows the difference in temperature. So it's called a temperature anomaly. So this is using the map that was in the previous slide. And so you can see here from New York City that across the board are forested wetlands, tidal wetlands, upland forests, maritime forests are all the coolest cover types in the city. Of course, you can see there's a huge range. So, you know, if you've ever been to New York City, if you're, you know, way down in Staten Island or in Southern Queens, that could be really different. You know, you could be miles away from a site in the Bronx. And so you can see this range is really big, but on average, we found that our upland forests were on average 5 degrees cooler than other types of tree canopy. So when you go for a walk in a forest, you're going to experience a very a significantly different temperature, and it'll be much cooler. I just pulled this figure was just made yesterday, looking at one really hot day. So this is air temperature, and this is in 3 parks in New York City. This is Clove Lakes Park, Forest Park, and Seton Falls Park. And so we had our, the gray line is kind of the street tree control sensor, and then the red line is the degraded forests, and the green line is the healthy forest. And so you can see our natural area forests are, you know, cooler, like probably 5 degrees cooler in the hot part of the day than the tree in the designed streetscape. And so hopefully I'll have some of this to share with Lisa, Michael, and Weston for Seattle specific soon. But I'll just sort of say a lot of our work is really focused on case making and describing the importance of natural areas and the importance in management. And this is one of the ways that we've started to do that. All right, so in summary, here are some kind of overall trajectories in natural areas care across the US. So we're seeing land conversion. In New York, our natural areas are actually pretty well protected in parkland. We have a lot of local laws, but from working with our network cities, we know that some other cities that have not as great of protections or are, you know, developing really quickly, that some of that land is being converted to development. And we've also seen, this has happened in New York too, we've seen natural area parkland be converted to another type of parkland, for example, a soccer field or another type of use. And so not to say that that's, you know, can't happen sometimes, but that this is happening at a pretty rapid rate. Climate and urban impacts can really cause decline in the overall condition of forests and cities. And so across the board, looking at weed species care is really common, and kind of thinking about regeneration and trajectories and making sure we have forests that are healthy in the future in the face of some of these threats is something on kind of top of mind. But there is not a lot of data and information kind of collectively that has kind of described that at scale. And so that's something that we're interested in doing in our network. There's lack of funding and political will across the board. We've conducted surveys on funding for cities in our network, and some cities have a lot more funding than New York City, if you kind of look at it as a proportion. So, but still on average, less than 5% of parks budgets are going to natural areas care in our network cities, despite being a major land use type. All right, so now I'll shift into sharing some resources that we have developed in collaboration with our network. So the first is the Forest and City Resource Library. So this idea really came out of our very first Forest and Cities Network meeting in 2019, where we met for 3 days and we developed case studies and learned a lot from each other, but kind of left there feeling like this is great information, but it's kind of hard to understand where to start or how to file that or access protocols, readings, examples of management planning. And so coming up with a way to organize that was something we heard people were interested in. So we developed the Forest and Cities Resource Library. We have a link that I think is in the chat, or we can put it in the chat, that you can access it. It's open access and anyone can submit a resource. So if you have a resource that you think is you'd like to see on the resource library, and that would be valuable to people that are managing and caring for these spaces, there's a place on the website to submit it. So there's management plans, protocols for monitoring, section focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, climate change. We also have fact sheets. So some of the facts I rattled off about, the amount of natural areas, and just some like national facts. There's, I think, a section in there about that. So there's a QR code there, but this is a great place to see case studies and kind of anything. We've done our best. There's over 100 resources here. They're really exclusive and kind of focused on natural areas care in cities. Just to give you a sense of a few resources that are on the library, there's this forest patch first aid kit for volunteer stewardship that came from the city of Baltimore. We have a tool we developed in New York City that's focused on developing planting palettes that are incorporate native local plant communities, but also trends and trajectories related to climate change and which species might do well. It's not suggesting you plant a bunch of southern species, but it has some recommendations and information in there. This is really kind of East Coast focused, but it could be a model. So anyone that has just really East Coast forest types in there, because we developed it for New York, but it could be an example of an approach to how to consider climate stressors and different plant preferences and climate change information. All right, so then there's our newly released Urban Silviculture Guide. So this is on our website too. So this really just came out about a month ago. We have some hard copies I gave to Lisa, Michael, and Weston, but there's a PDF version online. And this really came out of a lot of discussion with the US Forest Service about how we frame our work in natural areas in cities, and how the Forest Service and kind of the broader forest community at large frames forest practices. And when we talk about even the way the New York City Parks Department forest restoration team is structured, it's they view themselves as doing forest restoration. That's what their kind of team name is. And restoration and conservation are all basically types of silviculture practice, but the Forest Service has this kind of more like a kind of like more set up structure around silviculture, where you have to have a silvicultural prescription before you can do management interventions. And typically when we brought this up with a lot of our colleagues in New York, the first thing they thought of was cutting down trees, and we don't really want to do that in New York, even though sometimes we do want to cut down trees. We're working on a thinning project right now of a past planted site that's too dense, but anyways, just to say that, this framing and calling our work silviculture really has opened up a conversation with rural foresters and managers that when I first say, I work in, forestry in New York City, they think I'm either like a forest ranger in Central Park or that I'm doing pruning on street trees, which are both important jobs that I think would be really fun. But, it really kind of took a lot of discussion and kind of explanation to say, what we're really, we're planting trees, we're thinking about forest ecosystems, we're thinking on a long-term time horizon, and all of those principles are really all forms of silviculture. And so, not to say that, anyone that works in cities needs to start framing their work in silviculture, but it's a way to kind of connect to this well-established field of practice that has some potentially useful approaches that could be applied in a city setting. So anyways, we lay that all out in this guide. So we have a lot of framing in there about what silviculture is and how we're potentially doing that already in cities and how it connects to rural forestry. We have step-by-step instructions, which might be a little rudimentary, but if you're just getting started and kind of thinking about developing a management prescription or something like that, that's described as well. There's kind of glossaries and kind of sharing of terms, and then a lot of really great case studies that show how silviculture is already being practiced in the city setting. So, right, it lays out this framework. So it talks about type mapping, stand assessments, modeling, planning and policy, management goals, monitoring, kind of implementation. So all of that is, probably something that you all, live and breathe, but, and it's not to say this is the only way to do it, but it kind of just lays out a plan and some examples that could be a good starting point. So I just wanted to share a few of the case studies. I won't go into detail, but I think it's one of the kind of highlights of the guide is just to kind of learn and see how this kind of concept of silviculture is happening in other cities. So we have an example from St. Paul, Minnesota, where there was a forest stand that had been susceptible to emerald ash borer and had a lot of dead trees. And so they went and did a bunch of planting, and it kind of goes through the steps of how they are working on kind of changing the trajectory of that landscape, and they're part of our Forests and Cities network. One of my favorite case studies comes from the city team in St. Louis, where they are doing prescribed burning and also thinning for forest stand improvement to increase the health of their forest. And so this was a really fun example to learn about, because they kind of talked through how at first when they brought this idea up of a prescribed burn, that people were like, absolutely not, that you cannot do that in the city setting. And the place that they wanted to do it was right across the street from a hospital. And so they really talked through the relationships that they had to build and the political will, and that now everyone used to show up, the news reporters would show up when they started doing this, and now they've done it so many times successfully that it's not a big deal, and it's led to improved forest conditions in their city. So I thought that was a really interesting case study. Oh yeah, here's a picture of that. So, it's really low intensity burns, and that, they have to be really careful about the time that they choose to do that. But, this is happening right in the middle of a city. And so I thought, that's a pretty cool example. There's an example about kind of setting up trajectories after a big disturbance, after Hurricane Andrew in Miami, and kind of how they approach this with a silvicultural lens. And then great case study from Seattle about thinning for forest health. which, you know, we're just starting a project now in New York City that is using a similar model as this. And it's been great to have an example that we can show our park commissioners and people that are maybe skeptical of cutting down trees that were part of our Million Trees program, but are in a stem exclusion phase now. And you know, if we cut down a few, it will release the others to grow faster and increase structural diversity. And so it's been really nice to have some of these case studies to point to. So with that, I'll stop sharing, and I'm happy to, I see some stuff in the Q&A, but those are all the slides that I have, and I think we have a few minutes for questions. So thank you all so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much, Claire. It's so awesome to hear the summary and share it with this group. We can jump into questions, and I would definitely encourage folks to continue adding any that you have. And I'm just going to start at the top of the list because we've got the time today to make it through a couple. So there was an early question about the data gathering, and I wonder if you can kind of remember back to the first part of the presentation on your work with the forest assessment in New York City. Can you share the criteria used for gathering data?
Yes. So with our forest assessment, we I can definitely lead you to like a lot of details, and I think our protocol is up in the resource library if you really want to dig in on that. But and you can email me. I'd be happy to just even share it directly if you don't want to fish around the resource library. But we did a forest, similar like forest inventory plot. So we did 10-meter radius circular plot and collected, you know, very basic forest measurement, species, size. We did understory. We collected soil samples. We looked for earthworms, which are a problem here. So we looked at some other soil conditions. We looked at compaction, and we then summarized all of that into an equation that gave us kind of like a proxy value for health. And that was then related to a cost per acre. So that might be a little bit more than you asked for, but we have, yeah, so we have, if those are the metrics, the criteria, I guess, it just had to be a natural area forest or upland.
Great, thank you. Another question about New York City parks and how they're organized. Are there forest resource managers that are working to take care of these natural areas as well?
Definitely. Yeah. So our organization is really supportive. And in fact, we don't do a ton of implementation on the ground. So we do more supportive data collection efforts that the city hasn't historically been able to fund. We do some volunteer work, and we certainly have some small projects where we do implementation, but we really leave most of the implementation up to the city because we kind of view that as, you know, the role that the city should be playing anyways. But there's actually we just got a new parks commissioner under our new mayor, and there's a new structure. So now it's called the Department of Environment and Planning. And that's a department within the Parks Department. And within that, there's a Natural Resources Department. And within that, it's split into forests and wetlands, and there's a forest, a whole forest team that's managed by the Director of Forest Restoration, which is Christy King, and she's part of our Forest and Cities Network. And she manages currently, I think, 3 or 4 crews across the city. So it changes a lot due to funding, like, but there's some people that do monitoring, and then she has like forest technicians that are field-based crews. And then there's a contracts department that manages capital projects that are typically like heavy equipment. So if you've got to clear brush or cut down trees, or even large scale like weed removal projects and planting projects, will give to contractors. It's a little bit easier to get that money actually than expense funding, which is kind of bananas because it's so much more efficient sometimes to use the expense funding, but it's just the way the city budget is set up. So we have capital kind of contract foresters that manage contracts, and then our Christy manages our in-house crews.
Yeah, I can definitely say that, interacting and having that professional connection with the folks that are doing really equivalent work to, my role in Seattle Parks has been a really important part of the Forest and Cities Network. Okay, next question. This person is wondering how data can be compared with so many variables involved. And I think this in particular was related to the heat assessment work.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. We're gonna try to tease some of that stuff out. So we had people for the air temperature sensor part fill out a data sheet that had some information on like the kind of hyper local conditions of where the sensor itself was placed. And then with the surface temperature, I didn't describe that in too much detail, but we had some common cover types, and then there were polygons that had to be drawn. And so we tried our best to come up with some consistent protocols, and I think Lisa could could attest to this, that it's hard, right? Like it's really hard across different cities and settings and contexts to get everything right. But we're going to try to put that into our analysis and account for that in kind of a modeled way. But I think we're also just kind of, it's a little bit of a pilot to see how does it work kind of coordinating with 12 cities that have a really similar interest and trying to get a study set up that doesn't take up too much of people's time and is not crazy detail, but can still give us some information to have a few talking points about the importance of natural areas and the importance of natural areas care for cooling. So I think that's it's not perfect, and of course it would be a lot better to have like 150 sensors out in every single city, but with kind of the parameters we were working with, we did our best to account for that. But I think in the next month, we'll be analyzing that, and we'll have some more information to share. And that'll be a big thing that we'll talk about at our Forest and Cities Network meeting, is sort of how that worked out.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to being able to share that publicly with folks, and we'll plan to produce at least a blog post and make sure that it's included with the Green Seattle Partnership newsletter. So please make sure to sign up for that and stay tuned. I did just like a second ago get an email with the results. So it's funny.
Oh,
Crystal knows we're talking about it.
Should we screen share?
Watch out.
Yeah.
So let me jump through a couple more. There was a question about natural area conservation and the policies associated. And I think this is an interesting question, especially because you've got this view of all these different cities, which have really varied policies and approaches. I think the work that's happening in Florida in particular really highlights how far ahead of the game in some ways we are in the Northwest, that we do have conservation, and that we don't have, in our natural areas, really the focus is to keep those spaces conserved as natural areas. So would you like to comment a little bit on that and what you see kind of driving conservation in those cities?
Yeah, this really surprised us too. I think it really uncovered my bias, or just like kind of like local perspective, because in New York we have some pretty strict rules about cutting trees down, and we have already natural areas had some local protections. And when we did this national survey, like we didn't even really have like development in there as like this threat, but it kept getting written in as this other category. And so this is really something that is on top of mind to many other cities, and especially cities that are growing. Like New York City is an older city, so it has this kind of fixed boundary, and it has been a metropolitan area for a long time. And I guess I'd say that this just 2 weeks ago, I saw the city of Houston, which is part of our network, passed a local law for the first time to protect their nature preserves. And it's amazing because they had so many nature preserves, but they're growing so quickly. And that was one of the things that they said was, you know, really challenging is you kind of have like a few people that care a lot about natural resources in this massive city agency kind of trying to fight for land protection when there's all these other competing like zoning, like development, recreation, and just like that feeling like such a other issue that, you know, isn't a priority. But that was just, I think, like a huge win to sort of see that happen in Houston, Texas. And then, yeah, I think the Florida cities are doing amazing work here. And I know our Florida and Texas cities were talking to each other about this because they had such a common need for land protection. And the Florida team had actually come up with this really sophisticated way to incorporate like land use layers and prioritization so that they're like, hey, like development is going to happen and like the county is going to sell land to a developer. Our job is to tell them like which tract to sell that would have kind of like the lowest, you know, or just like prioritize which one would be better to sell than another one if there's some conservation reason. So they developed a whole system around that I thought was really innovative, that kind of like understood the problem and was trying to be proactive about it. But I think this is a super interesting topic that I don't work in legislation that much either in local laws, but this is something that I think just having more awareness, I think even within our planning department, which just got rejoined with our natural resource department, which we were so excited about because I'm saying we, but we and the parks, our natural resources division were constantly telling the planning department, like we were kind of like an afterthought about like they'd come up with some planning decision and then like tell us it was going to happen. And then you'd have to kind of fight internally. And this way, you know, making sure natural areas are part of planning decisions and not just an afterthought, I think is one idea.
Yeah, really important idea. There's a question about the loss of funding during the pandemic, and trying to understand a little bit more about whether public use of forested areas in NYC during the pandemic has had a lasting effect. And I did want to pull up the research paper that you guys provided, so I'll go ahead and send that as a response here. But if you could speak to that a little bit, I think it'd be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we did a quick survey of this. Yeah, thank you for sending that, Lisa. I didn't mention that, but we surveyed our network during the pandemic to just see like, are using as much increased use of natural spaces as we are. And like almost, I think all cities saw an increase in visitors to parks, especially natural areas where, you know, like our playgrounds were actually closed for a while because they didn't want people in that close of proximity, or kids, you know, still when people thought that you could get COVID from like touching something like that outside, like a piece of play equipment. But you know, so natural areas were a really good option. You could either be inside or you could be outside, and you know, bars, movie theaters, restaurants, everything else was closed. And so for people that lived in the city that didn't have outdoor space, it was kind of one of the best options to have a little bit of relief and, you know, not go crazy inside your house. And so we saw huge increases in use in our natural areas. And I think we saw some retention and people like kind of rediscovering the city in a completely different way than they ever had before. And that's been really great. And we've had some volunteers stick around, and the city has since, so even though, yeah, we lost funding in 2020 and that was horrible, but I think actually kind of this outcome has led to a deeper appreciation for parks and a way for us to really make sure to communicate how important parks were to people during the pandemic, which I'm hoping will like lead to an increase in funding over time. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. There's also a question from Tad about just the makeup of Seattle Park's natural areas, and in particular, the acreage of some of our larger parks within the system. So Seattle Parks overall covers about 6,400 acres, and then natural areas is roughly 2,700 acres. Some of that is right of way, and so yeah, isn't part of that 6,400 acres, just be super specific. I don't have off the top of my head the numbers from some of those parks that you named, but I will make sure to include in the chat here and in the response to the question, the GSP reference map, which is always a fun way to explore kind of where we work and get some of the background. As you can look through the contents on the left side of the screen on the reference map, you can get a sense of the acres within a park area as well. Okay, a couple last questions. Let's see. There's a comment from Lisa McGinty. She said, thank you so much for the presentation. And then in reference to the case studies you shared at the end of the presentation, were there local indigenous tribes included in any of the planning or process?
We have a section in the Silviculture Guide about traditional ecological knowledge, and it kind of references the nature of silviculture being practiced kind of for the first time by indigenous tribes, and it's not something that, you know, it's not a concept that we're creating, but the case studies, we don't have any that are exclusively written by any indigenous tribes, but I think, yeah, we mostly reached out to our Forest and City Network member teams, and I don't know all of their planning processes for all of those projects.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good question, though. Thank you. And then Ed had a comment that during the exceptional heat wave in Seattle in June 2021, the heat dome, as we so fondly like to call it, temperature measurements showed a 20-degree difference between forested areas and urban heat islands. And this is a powerful illustration of how important forests are as refuges for birds, animals, and people.
I love that. I wish we had I wish we had a sensor up during that heat wave. We'll have to look at some of the really hot days that came by this summer. Because I remember June was super hot in 2021, but a little cooler in 2022. But you had some heat waves this summer too. I know in July or August, I thought, but
yeah.
So pull
I
that
think
out.
It's a moment to say, stay tuned. There's definitely more resources to come in this partnership with the Forest and Cities Network, and we'll be really excited to host these cities here in Seattle in mid-November and to share out what we're learning across the country. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending. With that, I will also drop the Seattle Forest Week link in the chat, just in case anybody is looking for a last opportunity to come out and hang out in the woods tomorrow. We will be out there and are most days of the week. So feel free to check out greenseattle.org or seattleforestweek.org, and you can learn more there. Thanks everybody for your time. Thanks for your time, Clara.
Yeah, bye.